The US-China trade war has erupted onto a new and unexpected battlefield, TikTok. But this time, Beijing isn't playing defense. It's taking the offensive, directly targeting the American economy. Across TikTok, viral videos are exposing massive discrepancies between the cost of production and the retail prices of luxury goods. Items like the Hermes Birkin bag, which retail for up to $38,000, are reportedly produced at a fraction of that cost. Estimates suggest around $2,000, though precise figures are closely guarded by brands. These revelations have fueled a growing movement among U.S. consumers to buy directly from original manufacturers, bypassing traditional luxury retailers. But the digital campaign is only the beginning. China has escalated its response with tangible economic measures, canceling major Boeing aircraft orders and imposing new restrictions on rare earth mineral exports, vital components for American technology and defense industries. At the same time, Chinese President Xi Jinping is deepening trade ties with Vietnam, pledging stronger regional cooperation and promoting globalization, a clear counterpoint to the U.S. Protectionist trade policies. Meanwhile, back in the U.S., tariffs initially introduced under President Trump are still reshaping the economy. High tariffs on steel, aluminum, and automobiles, even targeting traditional allies like Canada and Germany, have triggered widespread retaliation. One justification cited by U.S. officials was the fight against fentanyl trafficking through Canada. However, reports from the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration indicate that less than 1% of illicit fentanyl entering the United States originates from Canada, casting doubt on the rationale behind certain trade measures. The economic pain is already hitting American households. Gas prices are up, groceries cost more, and financial markets remain volatile. The very tariffs meant to protect American workers are now driving up costs for ordinary citizens. Canada has stopped playing quietly. After Washington imposed steep tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and automobiles, Ottawa struck back with retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods. Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly stated that while Canada seeks stable relations, it will not hesitate to protect its national interests. The traditional friendship between the two nations, symbolized by the longest undefended border in the world, is now under unprecedented strain. American businesses, too, are starting to feel the consequences. Disruptions to supply chains, rising input costs, and diminished consumer trust are painting a bleak picture for sectors that once relied on stable cross-border cooperation. As tensions mount, China has gone further by threatening tariff hikes as high as 104% on key U.S. exports, like soybeans and sorghum. In retaliation for new U.S. trade barriers, Beijing has also suspended cooperation on fentanyl control agreements and placed fresh limits on American cultural and financial products. The trade wars are no longer theoretical. They are unfolding in real time, reshaping economies, alliances, and political futures, far beyond what even the most seasoned policymakers had anticipated. The US-China trade conflict has opened yet another volatile chapter. But this time, the fallout is hitting far beyond tariffs on steel and aluminum. While viral protests sweep through TikTok and factory workers rally online, the broader economic front is growing more unstable. In a new escalation, China's manufacturers have refused to fold under American pressure. Instead, they are pushing back aggressively, exposing a widening crack in global supply chains. Meanwhile, tensions aren't just boiling between Washington and Beijing. Germany found itself pulled into the fray after former President Donald Trump took aim at the country's clean energy policies, calling Germany's transition to renewables a disaster and mocking its reliance on wind and solar energy. In response, German leaders, including former Chancellor Angela Merkel, firmly defended their climate initiatives, framing the energy shift as a principled commitment to sustainability and emissions reduction, not a weakness. Our energy transition is not a mistake. It is an investment in the future, Merkel emphasized. But the ripple effects of the trade war are now directly impacting American households. Everyday staples like bananas, shrimp, salmon, and coffee are being hit with new tariffs. Bananas from Costa Rica and Ecuador now face 10% tariffs. Shrimp from Indonesia sees a 32% tariff, and Vietnamese shrimp up to 46%. Norwegian salmon carries a 16% tariff. while Brazilian and Ethiopian coffee now faces 10% duties. Grocery stores operating on razor-thin margins won't absorb these costs for long. Once current inventory clears, prices on shelves are expected to surge, with working-class Americans and retirees among the first to feel the pinch. Meanwhile, a separate crisis is brewing overseas. As tariffs climb to unprecedented levels, the U.S. has canceled billions of dollars in orders from Chinese suppliers. Now, over 25,000 shipping containers, valued at more than $2.8 billion, are stranded at ports like Shanghai and Shenzhen, turning logistics hubs into sprawling container graveyards. American companies, desperate to reroute supply chains, are eyeing Southeast Asia. But theory and reality diverge sharply. Manufacturing capacity in Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia is already overwhelmed. Rising labor costs and skyrocketing logistics fees are compounding the challenges, leaving many firms stuck between a crumbling Chinese bridge and an overcrowded Southeast Asian detour. Despite mounting pressure, Chinese manufacturers are holding firm, refusing to cut prices. The result is a deepening economic standoff that delays shipments, inflates costs, and ultimately leaves the American consumer footing the bill. The damage is staggering. Within 48 hours of Trump's tariff announcements, nearly $5 trillion was wiped off global stock markets. The S&P 500 dropped over 600 points. The Dow Jones plummeted by almost 4,000 points. Investors worldwide have been left reeling from volatility not seen in decades, with confidence in American economic leadership badly shaken. Meanwhile, China has counterattacked with tariffs reaching up to 125% on American imports, including cars, electronics, and agricultural products. At the same time, Beijing is accelerating efforts to promote alternative trade currencies and reduce global reliance on the U.S. dollar. The European Union hasn't stayed idle either. In response to Washington's tariff policies, EU member states are strengthening trade partnerships in Asia and South America, aiming to lessen dependence on American markets. This realignment signals a broader shift in the global power structure, one that could redefine international commerce for years to come. Today, it's clear, this trade war is no longer a political skirmish. It's a seismic shift reshaping the global economy, and the aftershocks are just beginning. As the United States increasingly turns inward under protectionist policies, other nations are moving swiftly to forge new alliances, reshape economic ties, and build a future no longer dependent on Washington. This realignment isn't just a reaction to the trade war. It's a calculated strategy to foster a multipolar world. Countries like Canada, Mexico, and members of the European Union are accelerating efforts to create independent trade networks, seeking alternatives that bypass unpredictable U.S. policies. For example, Canada has intensified trade discussions with China, aiming to open new markets and reduce reliance on the American economy. Meanwhile, the European Union is actively expanding partnerships across Asia and Latin America, adjusting its global strategy to diminish dependency on the United States. This shift shows that former allies are no longer willing to accept conditions set solely by Washington. They are building parallel paths and slowly dismantling the traditional economic blocs dominated by the U.S. At the same time, a financial revolution is quietly unfolding. As the U.S. dollar shows signs of weakening, alternative currencies are gaining strength. The euro is increasingly viewed as a safer choice for international investors, while China continues to push the yuan as a viable medium for global trade. The shift is undeniable. Countries and multinational organizations are reducing their dollar holdings and seeking greater financial independence. The prospect of the U.S. dollar losing its unrivaled dominance is no longer theoretical. It's becoming a practical reality. This transformation is not just financial, it's political. As alternative currencies gain traction, the balance of power within global markets is changing. International transactions are increasingly conducted in euros, yuan, and even digital currencies, reflecting a new strategic direction by many nations. But does Washington truly grasp the scale of this shift? $5 trillion. That's the staggering amount that vanished from global markets following the escalation of tariff conflicts under Trump. The U.S. dollar's weakening position and the erosion of international alliances are signals that America's traditional leadership role is under serious threat, and the hidden danger goes even deeper. Two countries, Japan and China, currently hold a combined $2.1 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds. Japan's holdings are estimated between $1.09 trillion and $1.15 trillion. China, despite a recent reduction, still holds approximately $870 billion to $1 trillion. Together, they control nearly one-fifth of America's total outstanding debt. This reality creates a precarious situation. If either nation were to sell off a significant portion of their U.S. bond holdings, the global financial system could be thrown into chaos. In simple terms, the United States may still be steering the ship, but the keys to stability increasingly lie in the hands of others. If these trends continue, the U.S. risks facing not just a recession, but a long-term loss of influence over the global economy, a shift that could define the next era of international relations. The question now is not whether change is coming. It's whether America can adapt before the ground beneath its leadership gives way entirely. Beneath the surface of the global economy lies a hidden threat, a financial bomb, primed but not yet detonated. That bomb? U.S. Treasury bonds. And the hands holding the trigger are none other than China and Japan. Together, these two economic giants control nearly $2.1 trillion in U.S. debt. If tensions between Washington, Beijing, and Tokyo continue to escalate, the possibility of a large-scale bond sell-off becomes more real and more dangerous. The consequences of such a move would be swift and devastating. If China and Japan offload their U.S. Treasury holdings, interest rates across America would surge, making it dramatically more expensive for ordinary citizens to borrow money for mortgages, car loans, and student debts. Inflation would spike as the dollar weakens, and imported goods would become far pricier, hitting working and middle-class families the hardest. Businesses, already struggling with rising costs, would find it even harder to secure financing, slowing down investment, stifling job growth, and pushing the economy closer to a full-blown recession. It would be, as many analysts warn, like triggering an unstoppable financial storm, a chain reaction no nation could escape. Yet while China and Japan possess this power, they also have every reason to hesitate. Dumping U.S. Treasuries would not be a surgical strike. It would be a global economic firestorm, hurting everyone, including themselves. A mass sell-off would tank the value of their own holdings, damage their export competitiveness by strengthening their currencies, and risk sending their domestic economies into turmoil. In short, no one can pull the trigger without shooting themselves too. Still, the risk remains. Even the threat of a major shift by China or Japan could rattle financial markets, spook investors, and force Washington to scramble in response. This is the high-stakes reality of global finance, a delicate, dangerous balance where trust, fear, and cold economic calculation collide. And yet the turbulence doesn't end there. Over the past week, the American public has been hit by waves of increasingly alarming news. Supporters of the 45th president received not one, but three back-to-back urgent emails on Sunday, warning of imminent economic disaster unless action is taken. Meanwhile, a striking absence on national television fueled further speculation. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, expected to defend the administration's trade policies, was notably missing from a major Sunday news program. "We had hoped to speak to Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick today," the host announced, "but the White House declined our request." In his place, a former Trump economic advisor, previously convicted of contempt of Congress, returned to the spotlight, fiercely arguing that tariffs are tax cuts. Economists immediately pushed back. Tariffs, they countered, are not tax cuts at all. They are direct taxes on imported goods that inevitably raise prices for American consumers. Every additional cost is passed down the chain, from importer to retailer to the person buying groceries, clothing, or electronics. Later in the broadcast, former White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett, once praised for his market forecasts, was asked about what Americans should expect next. His response? "I don't know what's going to happen this week." It was a chilling admission. In an economy already teetering from global instability, mounting tariffs, and eroding alliances, even seasoned insiders are now openly admitting that no one knows how bad things could get, or how fast. The global economy isn't just facing turbulence. It's staring at a financial hurricane, fueled by fear, mistrust, and decisions made in isolation. and the storm clouds are still gathering. As uncertainty rattled global markets, the United States faced mounting pressure from all sides. The shockwaves intensified when China, South Korea, and Japan announced a tighter trade alliance aimed at counterbalancing American tariffs. Experts now warn that if this instability deepens, the U.S. risks sliding into a dangerous era of stagflation, a rare combination of economic recession and spiraling inflation. The alarm bells grew louder when, during a televised phone interview, former President Trump made a startling comment: "I really do want a third term." A statement that flies directly against the U.S. Constitution's strict two-term limit for any president. At the same time, troubling reports surfaced from immigration cases. A federal judge, previously blocking deportations, was stripped of access to national security briefings. Refugees who had legal grounds for asylum were allegedly transferred under questionable conditions to Central America, where humanitarian organizations flagged severe risks. A leaked audio clip, allegedly linked to a Trump advisor, chillingly stated, "I don't care who they are, they'll die there." While authenticity is still under review, the public outcry over the treatment of vulnerable people has been explosive. Against this backdrop, a photo appeared online. Senator Lindsey Graham smiling on a golf course alongside the former president, celebrating a private tournament win. For millions of Americans struggling with soaring prices, job losses, and shrinking benefits, the image felt like a cruel disconnect from reality. Promises to protect workers and veterans seemed increasingly hollow. Tens of thousands of federal employees were laid off. Social security offices were shuttered. Programs that once provided food and health care to nearly 1 million children were slashed. But it was a tone-deaf social media post that caused perhaps the fiercest backlash. A video allegedly shared by a congressional account showed dancing pallbearers under the caption, "Meghan won, the libs zero." Many saw it as mocking a humanitarian tragedy. Even former Trump supporters voiced disillusionment. One said simply, "I feel betrayed." When asked about the effects of tariffs, Congressman Jody Arrington offered a strained metaphor. "It's like renovating a house. It's messy at first, but it gets better." But for those who have lost their homes, their jobs, and their stability, that metaphor now feels painfully empty. Former officials have sounded the alarm. Without transparency and real leadership, America risks more than just an economic downturn. It risks a deep erosion of trust in its institutions and a blow to the very foundation of its democracy. Meanwhile, as America grappled with internal fractures, another silent revolution was reshaping the world. For decades, the U.S. had reigned supreme over the semiconductor industry. Giants like Intel, AMD, and Texas Instruments led the way, setting the technological standard across the globe. But quietly, persistently, China rose. What once seemed impossible is now reality. China is claiming its share of the $700 billion semiconductor market. The U.S., seeing its technological dominance challenged, responded with sweeping sanctions, blacklisting more than 140 Chinese companies and tightening control over critical chip exports. Yet the landscape has already shifted. In fields once monopolized by American giants, new players are emerging. Supply chains are evolving. The balance of innovation is tilting. The younger brother has risen, and he's no longer waiting for permission at the table.